It's the Sustainable Ministry Show, and today we're going to finish up our conversation on safety policies in your church. This is episode 11, saying yes when you're saying no. Hey folks, we are back one more time, and we're going to finish our conversation about child and youth protection policies. We've got Stephen Ingram, Dave Sipple, and Annette Safstrom with us again as we wrap this up. Where we ended last, we started highlighting some areas where it's easy for ministries to kind of maybe bypass the policy or feel like, oh, we can fudge on this part of the policy. Where are some areas that you've seen churches or of ministries where they've just kind of slipped around places in their child and youth protection policies?
Well, the biggest one I see in children's ministry is the checkout policy for kids. If, let's just say, for example, it's you have to give a tag to pick up your kid. It has to match the kid's name tag or, give a pager or number or something like that. It's real easy for the teacher, whoever's working in the class, to give the kids back to their parents without checking that, especially if they know them. And in my job as director, I would say, even when I pick up my kids, I want you to ask for my tag because you don't know who's standing behind me and you don't know what their issues are. And even when we know people, or if we don't know them and we know this is this child's dad, the kid ran to the door and screamed, "Daddy," it doesn't mean that daddy has the legal right to pick up his child. And so we just live in a world where you have to be aware of those kinds of risks. And so just a simple thing like checking their tag or whatever your pickup policy is super important.
I would say in youth ministry, the ones I see that can often be the most difficult. One is driving. It's I see it all the time with youth ministers. Well, this kid got left. Their parents were busy. I just took them home. Okay, who was with you? Well, it was just the two of us. That's a huge liability. You got to be so careful with that. The second one is ratios, adult to student ratios. That's a huge part, not only of child safety, of youth safety, but also of just doing good relational ministry. And that leads to the last one, background checks, which is sort of a baseline, I think, for most protection policies. Doing background checks on every single volunteer that has any contact with your youth or with your children. And a lot of times that is left behind or doesn't get followed because youth ministers are recruiting people for trips all the way up until the day of or the day before a trip. And so a lot of those kinds of things happen because people aren't prepared. They're not doing the work ahead of time to make sure they have the right number of chaperones and backup chaperones. And so those are the three: driving, ratios, and background checks are the ones I see.
Yeah. I would add that sometimes we background check somebody and it's like we did a lifetime background check on them. Mm-hmm. 5 years later, we haven't done another one. And so I think once we get somebody in the system, we might get a little lazy and just, I check that person when the policy might have some kind of a every 3 years, every 5 years, who knows? And then the training also, we get people trained one time and we assume they'll never forget it. They'll never need a refresher. We forget, and the policy might have an annual refresher training requirement. So sometimes it's as easy as setting up a spreadsheet where you have the 2015 class of background check people, and you list everybody screened in that year. And then you have the 2016 class of people. And that way you can pull that spreadsheet out every year and go, okay, these are the ones that are 3 years old or 5 years old or whatever. And anyway, there's some cheap tools to make that easier. And here's an area that has surprised me in some churches. Some churches wrote a policy and then just left it. And it hasn't been updated. It hasn't been refreshed. If I was actually in a church where the policy was written in about 2000, and a lot's happened. 2004, Facebook kind of came around, and social media began to influence the way we interact with kids. And so a lot of churches haven't sort of thought about online interaction and what's appropriate in terms of their policy. So I'd say it might need an update now and then. We might be just getting a little lazy about keeping the thing up to date.
I'll tell you a
I've
trick
seen
that
two things this
I've
year.
encouraged. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I've seen two things this year. One is um, the adult or the staff person that's leading the youth ministry being left by themselves as kids are leaving. And so it may just be one male, and they've got a few guys and a few girls still hanging out, and just left there alone. And that's one place that people are slipping a little bit. And then there's a church we did an assessment at this year that they had hired some new staff people, but had not walked them through how background checks were getting done in the church. And so they knew about the volunteer process and were collecting volunteer applications, but then filing them in their office, there in the youth ministry office, and never passing them on to the admin that was doing the background checks. And so they had about 6 or 7 folks that just had not been trained or introduced to the policy. No background checks had been done. It was just because they were never told. It just kind of slipped through the cracks.
Yeah, I was going to say having either a staff person, whether it's kind of your HR person at your church, if you have one, or an administrator, who is really, really strict on that kind of thing, and telling them that you want them to be strict, you want them to be your constant reminder, that voice in your head, that annoying chirping on your shoulder. That's a great tool, because there are some people who it really is their gift to uphold policies, and sometimes they're not youth ministers or children's ministers. And so to have someone who's that constant kind of reminder, who's saying, hey, I know you got this trip coming up in 3 months, do you have the background check shut? That's another really nice kind of fail-safe safety net that you can put in place. It might be annoying, but man, it'll be really helpful for you in the long run.
I had something happen in my own ministry that I don't know. I tend to be a little bit of a watchdog, overly sensitive because of what happened in my church that I described in our last episode. We had a little incident that happened while I was volunteering there with another volunteer. And then in my own youth ministry, when I was a kid, we had something happen too. So I'm a bit of an alarmist, but we actually had a student leadership model in our ministry where some of my high school kids were leading middle school kids in small groups, like in a Monday afternoon Bible study. And some of my kids turned 18 during their senior year. And we actually, believe it or not, we took them through the training and background checked them, just because we were like, technically, they are adults working with those that are under 18. So again, I'm an alarmist. I don't know how everybody else would feel about that, but we just went ahead and said, let's just train them and get them used to the idea of what it's like to be an adult, and background check them so we can say we did. You know, it's cool. If you have a student leadership model, you might have a few of your own kids in the youth ministry that are 18. You never know.
Yeah, and it's one of those gray areas that we may enter into and not really consider in the policy, but then have to figure out how to navigate that. What about sometimes we have to go back to the policy and look at it and reevaluate things that had been written in before. And maybe a change needs to take place. What's the best way you guys have seen to go about implementing change in the policy that both is more supportive of the ministry and its growth, and also supportive of protecting the kids and adults in the ministry as well?
You know, I'll chime in. I think that it all goes back to what you said. People just want to know why you want to make that change. So I think there's a appropriate way to communicate that. It's not just that you want to change the policy, you're not happy with the policy, but remind people of this is all about our kids and protecting the adult, making the policy either more restrictive because you see a hole in the policy, or even loosening it up a little bit, honoring the spirit of the policy, but softening a bit to open the door for ministry to happen. We had a rule that I thought was too strict, where it said adults should not be in the hotel rooms with kids. And I didn't want kids being completely unsupervised. So we actually set up a system where we used suites, and that way the kids could be in the rooms where the beds are, and the adult could sleep out in the living room area of the room on the other side of a door. So technically we had supervision, but we also had our kids protected. So it felt like we softened it a little bit, but that we still honored the fact that kids were not in beds with adults and all that other stuff, sleeping in the same room, whatever, you know, but we also had supervision of our kids. So there was a good why behind the what. And I think that's important as you go to committees to ask them to upgrade, modify, shift the thing around a little bit. Just be prepared to explain your concern or your ministry drive that's kind of pushing your change.
Yeah, and I would say also have it where every say 3 years, get on a 3-year cycle where you just take the whole policy, you look at it, you get some parents around the table, some volunteers around the table, some church leadership around the table, and you look at it and you reevaluate it. And just like we were talking about with the internet and Facebook, every year there are new ways that kids and adults can communicate, to be in relationships with one another. And so it's important to remain current, to get on a 3-year cycle where you just reevaluate the policy every 3 years. You might just rubber stamp it and say that it still is applicable, but you might also have to add things or take things away.
Well, and I think maybe find another church in your area who you respect, and kind of compare policies, and have someone from the outside come in and look at your policy, because it's kind of like in your house. I have a table in my entryway. I can set a book on that table and it can sit there for 3 weeks because we keep walking by it and we don't see it anymore. And sometimes we can do that with our safety policies. We think that we've got things covered, but we're not seeing things. And I think maybe an educator or another church, have them look through your stuff and even walk through your building and point out things that they see.
And that prompts a scenario. I'm curious how you might respond to it. And it's a church, actually my home church. Our nursery has grown beyond what we have the ability to really staff for.
Yeah.
And we're setting up a second room and a second nursery. But there have been quite a few Sundays where we had more babies come into the nursery than we were prepared to cover. And we had to make a decision. Do we close?
Mm-hmm.
Do we just say, okay, we can take 8 and turn the rest away? How do you respond to that? Like in the struggle of growth in a ministry, and also making sure you adhere to numbers that can be allowed in the room, and numbers of adults to kids and all that sort of stuff. What's the best way to kind of move forward?
I think it's great that you're thinking about that, because having kind of a contingency plan is really what you need. Is what do we do when, and in the baby room, it's so important what your ratio is, because there comes a point where it's not safe anymore. You have more than about 3 babies, maybe 4 per adult. That's all you can do. And you're at a place where you can't watch any more kids than that. One person can't even see what's happening with those kids. So some of the things that we've done is, we've offered a room for the parents to sit with their kids, where they can watch the service. Like, we've had a nursing mother's room, but also another room where dads could go in and, be with their baby and watch the service, or have some people on call, have some people, if we know we're in this time where we're trying to beef up our staff and our volunteers, then maybe we have some moms that, a lot of times they're upset when they can't drop off their baby. Have some moms that, they might be willing to step in and go ahead and do a little training with them and just say, hey, if we get stuck, can we call you? And so have a couple of people on call, because maybe you will have extra babies that week. But I think if you can't, you have to turn kids away. It's not worth the risk. And as a church, we have to figure out how to say yes while we're saying no.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we say yes to?
And in your experience, do you find that parents are happier maybe to be turned away in the sake of safety?
I think if we phrase it right, but here's the other thing is, I would never make my volunteers say that. I would ask them to find me, or if I knew we were at that point, I would put myself in the room as a staff person and explain to the parents and find a way to say yes without bringing an extra child in the classroom that we can't watch. Because sometimes when you're a parent, you're sleep deprived, you just want someone else to hold that baby, and you're okay with 5 babies to 1 adult for an hour, and so sometimes, yeah, they do feel a little put off. So first of all, I wouldn't make my volunteers tell a parent no. I would, as a staff person, I would be the one to do that, and I would find something that I could say yes to.
Great. Well, it occurs to me that there are a lot of scenarios in churches. All churches are different. There are a lot of scenarios that people are probably facing in regards to the child and youth protection policies. Whether that's following up with somebody whose background check was, had a couple flags on it, or new changes to the policy that we're looking to implement and kind of tweak and adjust. Would it be okay then if folks could follow up with you guys if they have a question about child protection policy, that they could shoot an email? And if so, how can they get in touch with you?
I would say, definitely reach out, and at Ministry Architects, we also have a sampling of some documents and things. And that said, ask other churches in your area, send us an email too. And we've got some samples we can send you too. We also might know people in your area that would be a good person to contact. So for me, it's, Dave Sipple on Facebook, Dave at ministryarchitects.com. I'd love to help you. I served in a role where I was coaching like 735 churches for a while. And that was a frequent phone call. So I'm happy to walk through your policy with you, find you a good one any way I can help. It's Dave at ministryarchitects.com.
And I would love to do the same. Annette at ministryarchitects.com. You can find me on Facebook, but if you have a specific question, probably an email is better.
Yeah, same here. Stephen at ministryarchitects.com. The thing is that the most important thing is that you're asking the questions. And so then we've worked with, the nice thing about it is we've worked with a ton of different denominations, a ton of different churches. And so there's not one right answer. And so we can help you kind of discover maybe your right answer in that. So yeah, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and it never hurts to ask the question. Sometimes it's just helpful to have somebody else speak into that. So please reach out to us if you've got questions about this. If you've found a situation in your church that you're trying to navigate, feel free to reach out. And you can reach out to me at Bryant at ministryarchitects.com, or find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Bryant Johnson. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes, and as soon as it's available on Google Play, you can subscribe there as well for all the Android users. And then when you're on Facebook, make sure you go to the Ministry Architects page and like us there as well. Hey, thanks for your time this afternoon, you guys.